All right, friends, so let's go ahead and get started. I made a little sheet of paper for you called Going Forward, and it's just a breakdown. I'll put it on Canvas, but it's a breakdown of kind of what things are going to look like. Okay? And I also put on here like a note, you want to be sure you've got your commonplace book all caught up before you come back. And from break, and then also you probably want to buy Blood Meridian. And the other thing is what I decided to do after going through the quizzes and stuff this weekend, and thinking about the curve and things. And I decided, I'm just going to give people a 2 for every quiz we've had so far. Okay. And that'll be kind of like we'll use that as like your, I don't know, foundation. Does that make sense? So that's a 2 is like you got every quiz right. Okay. And then we'll integrate going forward what you get next. And so we'll try to build in a curve that way, if that makes sense. What else is there to say? Any other questions before?
I had a quick question about the confidence books.
Yeah.
So, do you want us to have written a lot about like every piece of literature you've read so far?
Yeah. Have you seen the video yet on YouTube?
Not yet.
Okay, so when you see the YouTube video, you'll see that there's like, I basically model what I want you to do. And so I pick a quotation and then I walk through the steps for it. I show you me doing 2, one for this class, one for another class. But I expect you guys to have chosen one for each reading day. Or no, chosen 2 for each reading day. So how long is it going to be? Well, you'll see this when you see the video. It's basically whatever it is you've picked, right? And then, of course, you want to make sure you identify the themes. So you want to make sure it's something that resonates with you and that you can build with it. But you have a lot of freedom. It's just that I will want you to have done 2, right? 2 per time. Okay? Any other questions?
2 per, like each per readings?
2 per day.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
2 per class day. So good question. Yeah, it's and I suggested, if you have more than one reading, you might want to do one, one from this reading, one from that. But you don't have to do that if for some reason, maybe you just like the other text more. But here you go. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So Machiavelli. Machiavelli's the prince. What do you guys already know about Machiavelli? He tends to be the one that people come in knowing the most about. Even just like from pop culture. Yeah, good. Writer. Actually, that's exactly how he was known in his time. That's what he wanted to be, was a playwright. Good. So an Italian writer. What else? Has anyone here read Othello? Right, Shakespeare's Othello. It's you see how influential Machiavelli is, because when Othello is written, the bad guy in it says, he's going to be the Machiavel, right? It's already become a sort of shorthand for the bad guy. What else? Anything else?
Kind of like, well, I guess like a real politic type kind of.
Yes.
Considering the duality of good and evil. Taking that into consideration.
Good. Can you say more about realpolitik or realpolitik?
The idea that politics, the foundation of it, is not based on idealism
what people are.
And that should be the basis of like how you think.
Not what you want, but what people are. I'd write that down. That's a good, what people are. That's a really good frame up of this. And like, if you're thinking of this in terms of Hamlet, right? This is one of the things that you could say, oh, this is a thread, because Hamlet is like obsessed with things should be how they are. He's really unhappy with any sort of inauthentic representation of the self or of the kingdom or politics. And, you know, of course, he ends up embarking on the exact thing he disdains, right? Because he pretends to be crazy. So he already, and we talked about this with the Renaissance humanists, they have a big kind of conflict over, you know, seeming versus being. I write this down. Seeming versus being. What something seems to be and what something is can be different. And for the Renaissance humanists, the sort of core of corruption is when there is that difference, that duality. We can go back to thinking about it in terms of Augustine as well. And it's worth pointing out that both Hamlet and the City of God are dealing with Rome and kind of the memory of Rome, the challenge of Rome. And in the City of God, you have the same thing, but maybe couched a little differently. So let's write it down and be sure we have it written out. City of God versus City of Man. We walked through this, and as we talked about, a lot of times it's hard to get into Augustine and the structure of what he does. So we were using exemplars from his critique of Rome to do that, a couple of other things. But one of the things we learned is that Augustine is also interested in this problem of, okay, what is the real thing and what is the imitation? So I'd write that down. What is the real thing? What is the imitation? And the City of God, he ends up saying, is the real thing. The City of Man is the imitation. Well, what's the difficulty? It seemed at first glance, like when we talked about it on the first day we studied Augustine, that it was going to be an open and shut case. Perhaps it was just going to be an open and shut case. That, you know, the real thing's the City of God, so that means Christianity and the church is the real thing. The fake thing, the imitation, is the City of Man, and so that means Rome or politics or secular society is the fake thing. It turns out that's completely wrong. Because Augustine tells us in Book 1, at the very end of Book 1, that inside the institutional church are members of the City of God, City of Man, right? And outside of the institutional church, it seems that there are members of the City of God. And if we spend a lot of time reading Augustine, you'd see a lot of his sort of leading candidates for members of the City of God are pagan. He goes, there's a passage where he goes through and he talks about different, for example, outstanding examples in the Old Testament, and the ones he names all happen to be people who are not a part of the tribe of Israel. Okay, so we cannot look at him asking the question, you know, that Hamlet's interested in, too, what's real, what's fake. You can't answer it with a simple binary. It cannot be done. So what did we say to do instead? and we did this in two ways. We did this one way when we talked about, the very first day we talked about Augustine, and we talked about what I called the order of love. So I'd write that down again: ordo amoris, order of loves, ordo amoris. And we also talked about it when we went through and we did this Cato Regulus textual comparison. This is what it is more appropriate, I think, to say. And I'm not going to necessarily get this perfectly correct as a metaphor, but it's useful. Imagine Augustine. Do you guys know the phrase slice of life? The slice of life, like anime, or slice of life, sitcom or whatever, right? It's like you're pulling out, a moment in time, right? And it's an experience of this moment in time that is kind of, I don't know, normie. How would you explain it? Right. Good. Yeah, like you might see a character brushing their teeth and then getting on the bus, and then they're gonna go to school. Maybe they'll come home and they'll chat with some friends, talk to their mom at dinner, whatever. So that kind of thing, right? I think of Augustine as someone who pulls out a slice of life, whether the slice of life is him talking about, a story about ancient Rome, or the slice of life is him talking about something that's happening then politically. It's like a slice. It's like a cake, cutting it up. And the thing is, inside that slice of life is a whole world. And it is a mix, I'd write this down, of the city of God and the city of man. What happens in Augustine is that you find that this life is, in a sense, a mix, right? And that means for him that everything that is, thank you, has something in it that you might say is less real, but anything that is has an essence of the real in it, or else it couldn't be. And what this means is that he's really more interested in the person taking out the slice of life, looking at it, and trying to figure out what the order of loves is in that slice of life. Overall, what seems to be the motivating thing in that slice of life, in that mix. And this is why he can make this distinction between the city of God and the city of man, but he can present them as something that we experience altogether, right? It's at the same. In fact, you can't even tell if someone in the church is in the city of God or not. That's how mixed it is. So what does this mean for the problem of the real versus the imitative, right? Imitation. And the real, that seems like it's going to be an issue, because it's like we pull out the slice of life, it's all mixed, some of it's real, The order amoris is supposed to be clarifying. We get there by, in a sense, asking what is loved the most, what seems to drive the motive, the intention. Still seems a bit of a difficult thing to answer. What he ends up saying is this, and we talked about it a little bit, and it is, whatever is real, right, is true. Whatever is an imitation, it's false, but it can appear real. And for him, the city of man is a disposition, a way of acting, where you strain after sort of the false things, the false promise. And for him, false means lie. It's different, and I'd write this down, it's very important. For him, false does not mean the opposite, the total opposite of being. Because if you can pursue something, there's still something real in it. It's just an imitation. It's incomplete. It's a mockery of the real thing. But if you're chasing after it, there's got to be some aspect of it that is existing, is real. And so the thing for him is he's not saying, look at things in terms of real, not real, as much as look at things in terms of true versus false. Right? The thing about the city of man is that it's a seduction. It's a presentation of a way of life where you exalt yourself as kind of the center of the world, and all of your actions are meant to procure not just your survival, but your ruling, your conquering. This is why the lust for domination is the worst thing for him. And the person who does this, we see in language, because the way language works, we see people say they love themselves too much, right? You might say it's an inordinate love of self. Part of what he's saying is, no, that's an imitation of love. Why? Because love and truth go together. This is a seduction. This is a lie. This is something people get into because they think it's going to fulfill them, and they think it's what love is. And in the end, it destroys them, and they destroy other people along the way. Yes? Absolutely. It's a paradox because, and this is another way that I think he would navigate. This is love requiring sacrifice. This is a good question. He would navigate things in a slice of life, or if we're talking about ordo amoris, it's like, is the intention of what's being done something that exalts the self, like as for the sake of self? And if it is, you're going to see that it's not going to be able to generate sacrifice. What it does, and this is really important, is it sacrifices people to it. Okay, and so I'd write that down. The lust for domination is the primary characteristic of the city of man because it's an inversion of what the true thing would be. It is you sacrificing others for this end of narcissism, like to use a contemporary word. But in the end, it's all a lie. Okay, and if you're talking about the other side of things, the real thing, the true thing, right? You, in order to pursue what is truly good for the self, and incidentally for others, will require some amount of sacrifice of the self, not of others. Okay, not of others. And so if we think about him in terms of kind of the problem we get presented with in Hamlet, this what is real, right, and what is false. And Hamlet, he's very conscious of that, and he wants what is real to be the same thing as what appears. Augustine says, look, things appear all kinds of ways. And what you can do is you can use this interpretive structure to go in and pull out, right, what is more real, what is more true. But it requires a kind of constant comfort, not comfort in the sense of liking it, but acceptance that something that appears to be real could be wrong, could be a seduction. That's how he handles it. Machiavelli is, in a lot of ways, dealing with this same thing. Okay? If you go back to Hamlet, remember that we're told from the start, in an exchange between him and his mom, he tells his mom, he doesn't like for things to seem, he likes for them to be. And this is a reflection of the Renaissance humanist prioritization of authenticity, right? And authenticity is the remedy for corruption to them, right? You want to have a resonance, an accord between what seems to be and what is. And his father, when he talks to him about revenge, one of the first things he says is, don't taint your mind to undertake this. And what's the first thing he does? Pretends to be nuts, right? So he does the opposite of what his dad says to do. And, you know, he seems to think that in order to fight corruption, he has to, in a sense, enter into it, right? Even if what he wants is the real. That's kind of the setup of the beginning for him. And, you know, we have these weird moments, like we talked about how the health of the king's body, the ruler's body, is synonymous with the health of the kingdom, right? So you'll hear sort of about Claudius's degeneracy, and then you'll hear about the way that the people of the land are suffering, or the people of the land are getting this bad reputation, or the people of the land are not being allowed to rest, right? Because they have to make ships for war, even on the Sabbath. And so again, we're interested in kind of images and parallel images and studying them to look for a narrative, a sign. Machiavelli, you're like, God, how can you talk so much about these small things that we've already talked about? If you'll notice, Hamlet, Augustine, and Machiavelli and the Prince are all really interested in Rome. Okay, they are all really interested in Rome. That is part of the thing. That's part of the mystery of Rome, the legacy of Rome, is the problem of corruption, is the problem of appearing to be versus being. Now, if we go back to, I don't know if you guys remember this, we talked about this a little bit with Hamlet. We said, like, for a lot of the Romans, they didn't make the distinction between seeming and being, right? Do you remember that conversation? Okay, good. So strength to them is like an outward sign of health, right? Good. An outward sign in a way, even potentially of justice, right? You wouldn't necessarily have an account of justice where no strength was involved. And that's why Rome, in a lot of ways, when Christianity hit the scene, was like, this makes no sense because the God is crucified. Like, that's weakness. Very good, very good. And remember we talked about the beauty pageants, but they were called like purity pageants, Pudicitia pageants, right? And so the women would come out and they'd like give their bearing like this, to be very modest, how they dress, how they walk, all these things. And they wouldn't be awarded for beauty, they would be awarded for purity and chastity. Well, you'd say, okay, you might even question those, you know, values in the first place, but then you would say, well, how is looking at them on this like beauty pageant thing going to tell us anything about like their behavior? And we talked about how for the Romans, they don't make that internal external divide as much as we do, right? So I'd write that down. That really pops up a lot with conscience. We talked about Augustine and conscience and how this is kind of the time that it enters the scene when he's talking about the Roman rape victims after the fall of Rome and comparing them to Lucretia. And he says, you can't punish a woman for being raped as an adulterer because rape means that you're being taken against your consent, and it gives an identity, an interior will, right, that can be contrasted to what happens on the outside. Okay, and that's a really important movement. The analog that you have, it's not put so explicitly, but if you go back to when we did Socrates, the Apology of Socrates, it says daemon. He doesn't call it conscience, but a lot of scholars think it's an early version of it because he says, my daemon tells me not to do something. It doesn't tell me what to do, but it tells me not to do something, and it kind of goes off if I'm about to do something unprincipled or bad that I shouldn't do. Right? So all of this is to say, a lot of these people, right, they end up looking at conscience as a way of handling seeming and being, right? But the problem is, even as far as Augustine or Hamlet have to admire some things in Rome or reimagine some things about it or reinterpret things of it, you know, you kind of wonder, like, can you do that with Rome? Like, if the Romans themselves don't think the inside-outside thing happens, right? If they don't make that division thing, or if they're not making it in a systematic way, then how useful is this distinction? Go ahead. Yeah, say more. Mm-hmm.
Basically, for the majority of it making it to the empire, to the very end is where it falls apart. But they just kept fighting and fighting and fighting, so they had to work together.
Good.
For so long.
Good.
So there was not much internal conflict. So it's just like really, really interesting to analyze because it's like we've never had that many people in that wide of a space and demographic just work as one. Every time there was war, everyone was drafted. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor. It was just like we're all going. What's the problem? Like there was no problem.
Oh man.
It's time.
Actually, this is really fascinating. I'm going to pull this up, and then I'm just going to put. So what you're talking about something. Sorry guys, I can never do this right. Come on. Well, yeah. Oh no. Do I have anyone who wants to help? Let's see. Oh fuck. Sorry guys. Okay. Never mind. No, this is because part of the thing I want to write on the board so you guys can see the words, right? That I want you to write. That's part of the thing is like I'm trying to think, okay, how do I help them with their notes? So maybe let me take a picture and then I'll erase this. This is a really interesting thing to start with. Okay, right. Rome has this weird thing going on. Augustine talks about it, and Machiavelli talks about it a little bit in The Prince. It comes out a lot more in the discourses on Livy, is that Rome in its republic, and we've talked about the Roman Republic a few times now, it's really interesting. They expel the Tarquins because they're corrupt. Okay, they're kings and they're rulers, but they're kind of an embodiment of what Augustine would call the lust for domination. They just consume the treasury of Rome and they consume the people of Rome. They send the men to stupid, pointless wars and they rape the women that stay behind. That's what Lucretia is about in a lot of ways. So they get rid of the kings and they start a republic with Brutus. And we talked about him because he comes up a little bit for Hamlet because how did he get away with surviving long enough to kill the Tarquins? He pretended to be crazy. Good, very good. So he did what Hamlet did. He pretends to be insane, waits for the right moment, then strikes. Okay, he founds this republic, and like you said, the principle of the republic seems to be, or at least is aspirationally, equality. And the idea is that there's not supposed to be a big difference between, like, if you're a highborn senator or if you're a farmer. And Brutus and Machiavelli loves this story. If in the discourses on Livy, this is like his favorite person, his favorite. This is the person that that Machiavelli seems to actually think is a hero. Is Junius Brutus. His sons actually try to bring the Tarquins back, and Brutus kills his sons. He publicly executes them. And the Romans, they're kind of thinking, oh, he'll let them get away with it, because there'll be one law, right, for him and another law for everyone else. And in killing his sons, what Brutus is saying is, no, there's one law. There's one law. And so it's ostensibly equality. Similar thing, like if you think about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, right? They're not seated in a linear way. Part of the reason that King Arthur is a political mythology, is able to bring stability, is because he moves from having this system of hierarchy to having a literal round table. Okay? And so in a lot of ways, this seems to be maybe one of the solutions to the problem of corruption. Because think about it, guys. What's one of the essences of corruption? If we're go back to Brutus and his sons, it would have been corrupt for him to let his sons live. Why? Good, because then this is the essence, in a way, of the problem of corruption, is that it appears that there's one law, and I write this down, when there's really two. Yeah. Like the sort of, you could say, secret law is a good word for it. It's like, we know that person is never going to have to pay for what they did, right? Even if the law on the books is this. So Brutus, right, by killing his sons, is basically embodying the unity between seeming and being. There is one law. It's not that we say there is, but there's actually not. There is one law. Okay. Now, here you could see Machiavelli. Okay, so you could see Hamlet, and you could see Augustine as working through that in different ways, critiquing it, responding to it in different ways. The question is, how does Machiavelli thinking about this thing, the seeming and being thing? What he basically does, it's interesting, is he says, ultimately, the most important thing is that there appears to be one law, as I put it. So this is how he handles it. He doesn't say, make seeming and being line up. He said, no, basically the thing that really matters is that it appears the same. That it appears the same. Now, what does this mean for his politics? I actually think he kind of ends up being a little more egalitarian rather than less, but that's kind of more complicated and not really something we can get into right now. But the important thing is the way that he really handles this is he says, don't try to solve the difference between seeming and being, but do acknowledge that when there's a difference, it's corrupting. What does politics become about then? It's in you being true to yourself, but okay, I love what you just said. Okay, so one potential answer is, well, maybe Machiavelli in his own way is trying to find something something to authenticity, right? Being true to yourself. And he has these early ideas and uses of freedom that makes a lot of sense. But the next thing you said is really interesting, and this is why reading The Prince is really deceptive, because it seems like it's super easy. It is hard. It is a hard book. If you really go through it, it's like if you're talking slice of life, it's got those like mixed up everything, right? And what you said is, well, yeah, maybe you could see being true to yourself as a goal in this, but that seems to be related to having control of your environment. You're exactly right. Machiavelli does not think you can have control of your, I mean, at least it seems very possible. I would even go so far as to say that the reason he thinks that seeming and being don't work on lining things up, work on lining up the appearance, is because he thinks you can't have that much control of your environment to actually make seeming and being line up. And this is something that him and I would say Augustine too have in common, is they both acknowledge there's something about the way things work in this world that is really different from how it should work. Both of them have this sense that the way things are on earth is I don't think the right word is deficient, but it might be. Like if you go back to when we started with the book of Genesis, you think of the fall. You know, before the fall, things are one way. After the fall, things are harder, right? Things don't line up. You still have this creation that was called good, but you have all of these tensions, all these struggles, all these incompletenesses. For Machiavelli and for Augustine, they both are going to think, yeah, like think about the way the world actually is as we experience it. It's like you can talk about, well, Augustine would call it sin, and I think Machiavelli uses the word sin too. When people are making a bad choice, right, or an unvirtuous choice, you can talk about that as a source of instability in the world. But both Augustine and Machiavelli know that the world is unstable without even having to talk about people choosing to do a bad thing. Why? Peace shouldn't be so hard. Yeah, I like that expression. Peace shouldn't be so hard. You could have like even really well-meaning people trying to work towards some goal, cooperating, right? And it can still be a struggle to get things work because maybe miscommunications happen. You know, so maybe they do want to get along, but there's miscommunications and misunderstandings that get in the way. Right, yeah, maybe you overemphasize one aspect of what you should be working on, and that neglects the other ones. Rome worked in a way when it was all unified because they all had the same fear. Okay, remember that? They all had the same fear. And when the same fear went away, it didn't work anymore. Okay, even if maybe there are people who'd want to make it work. Another thing is it's hard to predict things like the weather even. Like if you're trying to make any plan, like if you're trying to go to the beach, right? Oh, here's one. What about, we talked about this a little earlier, all the flights like that are getting canceled, right? All the delays in the airports, you know, the security lines being 4 hours, baggage lines being 2 hours. Gas prices are up. The mom and me is telling you, go fill up on gas, like if you can. You don't have any control over that. But maybe you made a plan last week about all the stuff you're going to do. And maybe you're going to take a flight or you were going to drive a car. Well, sorry. right? You know, there's all these major things happening you have nothing to do with. And you have to respond to them. That's called contingency. And that's a part of the fallenness that Machiavelli and Augustine see. Yes?
I was just going to say, does that relate to the idea that you shouldn't worry about it because it's out of your control, or is that totally just separate?
No, I love it, right? So here's a great question. Well, how do we cope with that? And in a lot of ways, all of the people that we've looked at, Hamlet, Socrates, Augustine, and now Machiavelli, they're all in a way proposing a cope, right? Not a cope in a bad sense, but you have good coping mechanisms and you have bad coping mechanisms, right? Do they all kill themselves? Oh, this is a good question. So no, the one that, right, okay, you have two people who end in death, right? Or end in death on the screen. That's a good thing to point out on the screen. The screen in my head when I read, which would be Hamlet, you know, and Socrates. And they're not, yes, there's definitely a sense that, okay, these are not what we would talk about in our terms as suicides, but there's this sense of these are figures who are world weary, right? And are in a context where they're pushed in a way to a limit. And they deal with that in different ways, but there is a world weariness to them. Augustine is interesting because he lives to be fairly old for his time, but he dies like literally as his home is being overrun, being taken over, right? So as he's dying, his world, his home is falling apart. Machiavelli is interesting because he never, for a little bit, he has political power, and then he falls out of favor because he's falsely accused of participating in a plot that he was not a part of. So there's contingency. They kick him out after torturing him, right? And he never is able to come back into proximity to power, which was kind of his whole reason for being. That's what he really loved. So you're right to ask questions about like, whoa, what about these biographies, these individuals and how they act? And you're correct that whether you're looking at their thoughts or you're looking at their stories, like their own life stories, that the question of how to deal with the problem of corruption is front and center. So you say, this is one reason people say, don't worry about what you can't control. And yeah, that is one response to this, right? Like you have a sphere of control, right? And a lot of what you can control is maybe how you react to things ultimately. And if you think about it, you can take steps, you can make plans, you don't have sort of perfect control over those outcomes. But you can control how you react, you know, and one way might be to say, yeah, I have to acknowledge there's a limit to what I should be anxious about, right? Or maybe what I should feel like I should hold on to and what I should let go. And I think there can be a lot of wisdom in it. A lot of wisdom in that. Machiavelli is going to, how he's going to deal with it is he's going to say, yeah, it's true that how things should be and how they are is different. And the next thing he says is, you know, he kind of pokes fun. It's really fun. He's a playwright. He wrote a lot of, not a lot. He wrote some interesting comedies. He doesn't say, if you read The Prince so far, there's a famous part where he says, there's so far a difference between how one should live, right, and how the world really is, that any man who tries to be good will come to his ruin. And in the same place, he says, many have imagined republics and principalities. And that's a dig at Plato and at Augustine. Many have imagined these perfect places, these perfect rules, but both Socrates and Augustine, those things are in the next world. They're not in this world. Machiavelli does not say, this is one of the things that's super interesting about him to me. He doesn't say there is no real truth, real justice. He doesn't even engage anyone on the fact. What he says basically is, it doesn't matter if there is or there's not, because there's not here. And he comes up with this idea, and I write this down, called the effectual truth. The effectual truth. So he's not going to engage on the metaphysical points. He just kind of mocks the imagined principalities and imagined republics. He doesn't engage on trying to talk about their truth or their lack of truth. What he does is he says, it doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is what works. That is what the effectual truth is. It's like, it's not the truth, but it will do until the truth gets here. Okay? The effectual truth is what works. Keep that in mind. That is his solution to the problem of corruption. Yeah, no, you're right.
They didn't like having the kings, but whenever it got too hard, they would get a dictator,
Mm-hmm.
which is what they didn't want, but they all could agree on it for specific situations.
Right. And then kind of, this is, and Machiavelli deals a lot with this problem when you get to the discourses on, God, you guys are so smart. I wish I was teaching you the discourses on Livy instead of the Prince. But in the discourses on Livy, he gets to kind of this point. He's like, okay, you guys said you don't want kings, you got rid of them, then you keep having these crises where you've got to bring in some executive power that's very king-like. You don't want to call it a king, and you don't want to give it king powers, right? How do you manage this? Because Caesar, tries to be open about, well, I'm just going to be a king again, right? I'm just going to be a king, but it destabilizes everything. Well, what does he say? You have to appear. Like, appear, this is really important, appear to be something that is acceptable, right? Maybe have, I love this idea, maybe have the powers of a king. Maybe use the powers of a tyrant, but never, ever appear to be doing so. Yes?
I'm not sure if you're doing this right, but I think it's also depending on maybe who you choose. But also, I think it kind of reminds me of Cincinnatus.
Oh, tell me more. Very good.
Roman dictator was given power
Mhm.
in moments of crisis, but after crisis ended, he gave up his power. So
Great.
maybe I want to refer to the virtue
Mhm.
of the man chosen.
Yeah, so smart, so smart.
Go back to corruption.
Yes, say more.
I think that's what I have right now.
Okay, no, you guys, y'all are nailing it. Like, y'all are all nailing it. Okay, so Machiavelli, the problem of Rome, right, is that they end up having to respond to crises. They revert to king-like manners, but this is subversive of their entire sort of function or commitment, which is a certain type of equality, right? And equality before the law, especially. And so Machiavelli's solution, like I said, is you can be a tyrant, you can have these kingly things, you can never appear to be doing that. You can never appear to be doing that. The thing that matters is the effectual truth, and the effectual truth is what things look like. And so, trying to ask, how do I make things just on earth is the wrong question, he says. You can't answer that question. It can't be done. All you need to do is focus on what works, and what works is the management of appearances, even to the point where they seem to create reality. Now, Cincinnatus, the character you brought up, the figure you brought up from Rome, is a really interesting one to bring up in this context, because Cincinnatus is, in a lot of ways, a kind of gold standard. He's someone who takes the power, right? He takes the power of the dictator to be able to rule in a time of crisis. But when the crisis is over and when he's done his job, he lets go of the power. He goes back home. He returns to his life as a wealthy agrarian. He relinquishes the power. He's like a mythic figure. I mean, even in America, one of the things that people talked about when Washington gave up the presidency, they said he's Cincinnatus. Okay, it's kind of crazy. When we had our first transition of power between presidents, the world, in a way, or some of the world, was watching very closely because they couldn't imagine that someone would willingly give up that power. So people called Washington the Cincinnatus of America because he was going to relinquish it. And you're right, Cincinnatus is someone who, in a way, he's handling this problem of corruption. Why? Because he's someone who has the self-control, the self-mastery to come in, do what he needs to do, let go of power. Yeah, he set the standard in a lot of ways. Does Machiavelli seem to think any person like that is on the scene? No. What do you think? Do you think, yeah, good question. Should I rephrase the question? Do you think Machiavelli thinks that we can count on a Cincinnatus? That one will appear in politics?
I say no.
Okay, why not?
I say no because we as humans, we always have something we want to look for. We want to look at something. We like, I'm trying to figure out how to word it. I don't know if you watch Scandal.
Yes, I watch Scandal. I like Scandal.
And one of the characters that catch me is, this is not Olivia, but her father.
Yeah, he's interesting. Yeah.
Who runs P613.
Mm-hmm.
He effectively is running the United States as a private citizen.
Mm-hmm.
He's like the de facto president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And he can choose whether or not to let go of power of his authority. And he has throughout the series, he has let it go, but he always goes back to it.
Right.
Because authority is an addiction. You
right.
have power over people.
Authority is an addiction.
When he first came, his first clip ever on the show, he said they were talking about how Olivia opened her legs fit. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you gave it away to a man with too much power. Mm-hmm. He can't help you. Power, he didn't get elected by himself. Power is what got him elected.
Right.
Power is what gets things done. It's
good.
Also, like when you look at the Kennedys,
mm-hmm.
they're nicknamed America's royal family because of that glamour, because of that wealth, because of that, I guess, Princess Diana-esque, like,
yeah,
vibe.
Camelot. Yeah. No, you're right. No, it's okay. No, that's very good.
The danger to like not having like a centralized power because everyone's gonna try to fight over that power.
Okay.
Like in Rome, I know I read a book on Hannibal, and one of the reasons why they struggled to defeat him is because in charge of the military, the generals only had 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they were just, the reason why they lost is because they were just trying to be the first to beat him.
Right.
They rushed into battles. And it wasn't until they changed that 2-year rule in which they were able to beat him.
Okay, so let me unite your comments because both of you made really good comments, and I'll restate them. So, one thing that you bring up, and I love Scandal, so I'm happy you brought it up. Right? It's so good. It's so fun. I mean, one of the things you kind of see as the show goes on is that how power actually functions and how it appears are different, right? But it also seems like the person who even is secretly running the power, her dad, right? Like he does have a compulsion about it. He does have an addiction about it. And power, in a way, runs whoever has it. So it's like, on the one hand, you have a secret government, right, that's inside the parent government in Scandal. And that's what seems to have the power and to control things. But then it's the problem sort of raised, which is that, well, are these people run by their desire for power more than they're running things, more than they are authorities over power? And I think both of your comments point out, this is one of the things, is that power is needed. And I think you pointed this too. Power is needed for authority, right? Power is needed for coordinate. Power doesn't even have to happen for bad reasons. Like, power doesn't have to be a dirty word, bad thing in itself, but it also, at the same time, simultaneously, why being something necessary also seems to be, and this is kind of what the Scandal and the Camelot stuff brings up, seems to be corrupting. Right. When there's not an authority to wield the power, what do you get? You either get a tyrant or a civil war, right? That's very good. And like, you pointed out about Hannibal, okay, part of the reason that we focus on how the Carthaginian Wars acted as a psychological unifier for the Romans, because there's this outside force, this threat, Hannibal, right? And so their inner factions, their inner disagreements, in a way, they go away because they can band together and live under this Republican ideal, right? That, this idea that there's one law. But as time goes on, you have a problem appear, which is that authority, right, in a way, power needs to be centralized enough. It needs to be strong enough to respond to threats. Hannibal is a threat that, he's a military genius. And you pointed out a lot of the problems around how they're dealing with Hannibal are rooted in the fact that they have this law as a republic, that you've got these generals, they're the authorities who manage the power of force, coercion, and war, but they can only serve for 2 years. What's the problem? They're dealing with a genius, okay, who is also an inhabitant of a place with really difficult terrain and a lot of wealth. And every 2 years, if we're going to keep this law, right, which keeping the law as it's written is kind of their virtue. That's why they got rid of the tyrants, right? So there would be one law for everyone. It seems like maybe keeping this law, which was meant to handle the problem of corruption and power, maybe it's not letting them exercise power, right? Maybe it's interfering with their ability to defend Rome from this threat, because they're being interrupted, like in 2-year bits, changing strategy, changing battle plans. This is inefficient. Okay, this is inefficient. So they have to ask themselves, well, how do we adapt to this? If we are going to face a threat like this, how do we adapt to the threat within our laws without violating our laws, or without returning to this tyrant period?
And they just fix it by asking, does anyone want to try?
Does anyone want to try? Yeah. Well, okay, so this is interesting too, right? Because then one of the I guess you might say happy coincidences in Rome is there is someone who does manage it in the end, Scipio, but it's fraught.
Right, because there's always downside because after that, unless you're Scipio, why are you there?
Right. Okay, very good. And this returns us to another thing again, like with Scipio, with Cincinnatus. This seems like part of the problem. There's very few people, who seem to be able to handle these kinds of things without extensive corruption, right? What Machiavelli is going to say is you can't rely on those people showing up. Don't rely on Cincinnatus. Don't rely on Scipio. What you have to do is have a system that you rely on. And that system must always aim at the effectual truth. And it's really important, the effectual truth. So the prince is someone who isn't trying to bring justice, but is an expert at stabilizing and running the regime by appearing to be just. Yes?
Doesn't Cincinnatus, or I don't know if I pronounced it right, the system, doesn't that deal with like the people? Like when he said Washington gave up, transferred power, that system, it's the people that holds the leader accountable, that transfer, right?
Good question. What about the role of the people in this? And this is an important part of Machiavelli too, in the Prince and in the discourses. The people are very important in the picture. Because like you said, if we're talking about the example of Rome and like Cincinnatus, well, one of the things could be that the Republic was healthy enough and active enough that Cincinnatus trusted letting go of power, right? Maybe because he trusted the other people. Maybe he feared them. Like, if I don't give up power, they're going to attack me. But the people expect him to be accountable, and it works. It's good, right, that the people want accountability. However, you can't, just as you can't rely on the prince for Machiavelli, you also can't rely on the people. Why? Because, like he said in the part you read today, men are faithless. Men are faithless. Whether it's the few, right, the ones in charge, the elite, or the many. And I'd write this down for sure. He says there's one fundamental thing about human nature. And it is that we all desire to acquire. The fundamental thing about human nature is that we all desire to acquire. This is true for the prince, and it's true for people. And on top of that, he seems to suggest, like we said, a man who tries to be good will come to ruin among so many who are not good. He seems to say, if you've got like a Cincinnatus type figure, he's not going to survive. Okay? Someone who really played by the rules, he says it's going to be over for them. Because if you're playing by the rules, but everyone else around you isn't, they're gonna slaughter you. This is kind of what Hamlet ends up thinking. How do I deal with Claudius? Dad says, don't taint your mind. First thing he does is, nope, I gotta act in this corrupt way, right? To fight corruption. Yes. Good and weak are different. Say more.
Yeah. I know it's like a personal issue I have with people also. It's like when I first meet somebody nice, they will either like piss me the hell off, or like it takes me a long time to like them because I think that they're immediately weak.
Good.
And so like I understand that you can have like morals and you can be an empath and this and that, but if you're not going to live good, truly.
Okay, so this is a really interesting comment. You know, you're bringing up an important point, which is what happens when what it takes to be good seems to mean that you must be weak. You weak to the point where it seems like maybe you can't even protect yourself. Machiavelli, this is really important, when he says the effectual truth, what the effectual truth means, the way things are, like in how they work. How do they work? And he says, they work according to power and strength. That's what I'd write down. Power and strength. That is what politics is really about. Power and strength. You shouldn't be so focused on goodness or badness. What you should be focused on is power. And he would give this critique about goodness and weakness, that it seems like if you're being good, that there are going to be people who are willing to do really terrible things, and they're going to hurt you, right? They're going to attack you, and they're going to attack everyone that you care about. That goes back again to Machiavelli's, so many who would be good will come, or those who would be good will come to ruin among so many who are not good, right? So this attachment, he thinks, to goodness is to make, in the end, to make you a victim, because it puts you outside of doing whatever it takes to maintain power. Yes.
I was happy at the fact that she said that our politics is about power and strength, not necessarily goodness and badness, because I think that's the reverse that we have in modern day politics.
Say more.
I want to say since the presidential election in 2024, when it came down to Vice President Harris and Trump, there was they down and dog Harris, as if they call her everything under the sun of the child God. On the fact that she's a politician, and this is like a year after, I believe, after the Gaza and Israel war broke out. They call her everything under the sun, blaming her for the choices that her president Biden made under his administration, blaming everything that went wrong with that with this turmoil on her, kind of like putting their moral compass on display in front of politics, but politics doesn't have a moral compass because in essence it's a business. It's diplomacy. And they did the same thing with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. They downed her for saying Israel has the right to defend itself. When she was just in essence, when she was just replying, she was responding as a politician, because all politicians have said Israel has the right to defend itself because the United States is an ally of Israel. So they kind of, it's like they're putting their feelings in display of politics. When politics is emotional, it doesn't
Good.
feel, it doesn't think, it just does.
Okay, very good. That's a remarkable comment, especially because I think it captures a lot of kind of what Machiavelli is pointing to. Like if we're thinking of this in a Machiavellian framework, what he would say is like kind of what you said. Well, these are examples of politics and maybe fights over the good, right? That and in these particular cases of candidacy and the good, right? And voting for the person who can pass the purity tests of goodness. And what the question that raises, like you said, and like Machiavelli says, is, well, politics actually, Machiavelli would say, it's not about the good. You said it's about business, right? And I think what Machiavelli says is, well, politics is about what works. So this good, it's not that politics should be not good. He says politics is amoral, right? Take it out from politics. Take it out of the consideration. Think about what works. Now, the important thing, like I pointed out, is when he makes that distinction, he doesn't say morality is wrong, he says, we're not going to talk about that, right? He doesn't defeat it. He just says it doesn't work. Okay, so take it off the table. Politics can't be concerned with that as much as it should be concerned with outcomes. And that is exactly the kind of analysis like that you presented us with, because then the question, of course, in both those cases is, well, you know, there's a real focus on the good, but in a way that maybe people ended up being focused on it, Machiavelli might say, in a way that turned out not to be good. Machiavelli could say because they didn't get to be next to power, right? Goodness and power are divergent there. Yes?
Would you say then, I'm not sure if it's good and bad, but maybe good is a privilege in politics. Good and bad is a privilege.
Good is a privilege in politics. That's a good question. From Machiavelli's perspective, I think good is a privilege in politics. That's an interesting question. I think he might say that good is a vulnerability in politics. I kind of think, actually, that if you read The Prince and if you read the discourses, the real thing that Machiavelli fears is vulnerability. And I would write that down, right? What is politics meant to protect us from? It's meant to protect us from our vulnerability to mortality, basically. And in politics, that can mean all sorts of things, right? That can mean external and internal threats of coercion. It can mean things having to do with law and punishment. It can mean even threats like, there's a tsunami and now, our food chain supply is gone, right? Politics for him is about managing human vulnerability, minimizing it, like by making a big shield of power around us, right? And he seems to think that goodness actually makes you vulnerable, right? That goodness is just a door or path to vulnerability. And it seems to be explicitly vulnerability to mortality, right? If you say, I will never do X, and then you need to do X to survive, well, you're dead. Okay, but flip it around, go back to Socrates' apology. This is why he said, the problem with Athens is that your politics is consumed by the fear of death. Okay. The problem with politics for Socrates is that it is consumed by the fear of death, and it's fear of death that is the corrupter. Machiavelli is bracketing whether or not it's good or bad to be afraid of death. And he's starting from the position that that is what everyone fears, whether or not it should be. And if politics gets connected to the good, he thinks you become vulnerable to death. It's a very radical point in Western political philosophy. Because people obviously have known, like we can see in everything we've discussed, that how things seem to be and how they are actually, they can differ. Machiavelli's not the first person to see that, right? Everyone knows that. That's literally kind of where Plato starts at all. And everybody knows that sometimes, to win, if you will not do X or Y thing, you can't win. Everybody, you can just look at so many different civilizations and thinkers, and there's this conflict, right? This recognition that sometimes what victory or survival requires and what justice requires run counter to each other. Okay, there's a reason that we started with Socrates, who is like, yeah, sometimes that happens, and when that happens, death is not the thing you should fear. I think everyone kind of has already known what Machiavelli is pointing out. The difference is that Machiavelli is saying, quit trying to figure out how to bring the good and what works together. Quit trying to figure that out. Just focus on what works. That is the change in him. That's the change in him. And that's the change in the Western canon that is very radical. Because in a way, he's not even saying something like, it's good to be bad, like Thrasymachus does in the Republic. He's saying, don't think about the good at all. That's radical. He's saying bracket it, right? Just bracket it, put it aside. That is his contribution. And in a lot of ways, it becomes a fundamental contribution to modernity. Like, people think of him as the person who ends the pre-moderns, right? Because now there's a willingness to say politics and metaphysical questions shouldn't mix. Yes?
I want to answer her point when
Yeah.
she said goodness is privilege.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it is privilege, but I also think you're right. It's vulnerability as well. Because I think President Jimmy Carter is a prime example of goodness.
That's interesting.
Vulnerability. Because during his term, he tried all his might to appease the American people, but in the end, he fell flat. His goodness, his open-heartedness, it left him. It lost his reelection bid. He lost Reagan, and then you have President Reagan, who came in and appeased the masses, but then did detrimental damage to the United States, to our economy, to our domestic issues, international issues. We're still in the effects of President Ronald Reagan. Also, I would also like point out two figures like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
Right.
Two very polarizing
Yeah.
figures, and these two with same goal, different personalities.
Right.
Violence and peace. Malcolm X is more of what you were saying. I'm gonna do what works. Clearly, the violence is working because preaching, marching, people beat up on Bloody Sunday. It's not working for you.
Right.
So.
Right.
It's like a tug of war. It's like a double-edged sword.
That's true.
Politics, because politics in the end is going to cut somebody. Yeah,
it's going to cut someone, and you're exactly right. That is a tension between X and King, right? And then they both end up dying. Yeah, Carter's interesting too, because when Carter passes, everyone mourned him, whatever their partisan affiliation. They were like, this was a really good man. But in a way, like a lot of presidential scholars would kind of put on the Machiavelli hat and be like, well, we can agree that he was good, but did he make us or make himself vulnerable, right? And so you see those valences and categories again, over and over and over in politics. All right, so next time I'm going to go through a couple of examples from the Prince. You guys did a really good job of trying to get into his psychology and philosophy. And I'll do that and I'll put it on YouTube for you. So don't come to class, right? It's online and it's asynchronous, meaning I'll post it later so that you can travel for spring break or do whatever you need to do, right, to get ready, okay? Any other questions? You have questions? Okay, yeah. All right. Have a good break. Have a safe break. Bye, guys. Thank you. I love your backpack. That's really cute, Snoopy.